Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. I hope you're well today. Today we're going to dedicate this video to an historical INFJ of some importance, at least by my estimate, but I believe not only by my estimate. And this INFJ that we're going to be discussing is the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. Now, prior to this, just to remind you that I've written a book on the INFJ type, came out 2 months ago. It's doing really well, getting good reviews. The Ecstatic Soul, the most in-depth investigation of the INFJ ever conducted so far. Available in all the links in the description box down below for less than $10, either ebook or paperback format. If you have any question, you can just ask me and I'll be delighted to answer you. Why is Arthur Schopenhauer an important historical INFJ figure? Now, he's not the only one. There are many important historical INFJs. One only has to name Jesus Christ, the Prophet Muhammad, the Buddha, Plato, Saint Marcus Aurelius, not Saint Augustine. Saint Augustine was most likely INFP. And more recently, important figures, if not only for the best reasons, Trotsky, Hitler, and so on. And Spinoza is somewhere in the middle as well. But today I really want to focus on Arthur Schopenhauer. And the reason why I want to focus on him will become more obvious than ever if you have watched my videos on, first, the genius of INFJ alienation, dualism, and second, the genius of INFJ enlightenment, quietism. So I made 2 videos on genius in historical INFJs, focusing on these 2 modes of existence and their translation into works of philosophy, works of literature. These just happen to be the topics I selected because they're the topics that I'm familiar with, but people who have more of an interest in science, I'm sure could find examples, or people who have an interest in poetry or something like that. Cinema is another one. There are lots of really interesting INFJs in cinema, working in cinema. Obviously, this is a more recent kind of art historically, but still. Arthur Schopenhauer, from this perspective, is a very interesting figure because he's a transitional figure. My claim in the video on INFJ alienation is that really the history of Western philosophy is to a large extent initiated. The conditions for it are supplied by an INFJ type, who is Plato, and who embodies the alienated type of INFJ, hence his creation of hidden worlds, the world of the forms with a capital F, a world that isn't accessible to us, that is perfect compared to the world of the senses, all the imperfection and the corruption that will be later inherited as a theme by Christianity. Imagine how mind-boggling it is, just for a second. Just think about how mind-boggling and mad, in some ways, this theory of mine is. That you could explain the trajectory of Western thought and many of the Western religions on the basis of this influence of an alienated INFJ type. And even more fascinatingly, I explored in my video on INFJ Enlightenment that you could make the same observation about Buddhism. The Buddha was an INFJ as well. And if my knowledge allowed for it, I would have liked to make a case for Islam as well. The Prophet was an INFJ, and there are many fundamentally influential INFJs in Islam and Islamic philosophy and thought. But for Western philosophy, Schopenhauer is a transitional figure because he is still, I think, within alienation, as his philosophy shows. Because his philosophy is essentially predicated on the idea that the substance of the world, what Kant called the thing in itself, or the noumenon, is something he calls will. And will is like blind impulse, blind appetite. Something that, a principle that just seeks to nourish itself and survive and persist. regardless of any questions of morality or anything like that. So blind striving, something that is not very different from war in a lot of ways. So Schopenhauer's point is that the substance of the universe, the thing in itself, what lies beyond our perceptive powers, is not the realm of the ideas, this pure abstract realm of beauty, but something a little bit ugly, really, something that is threatening human beings with extinction, even as it always seeks the survival of the individual human being. And he thinks that precisely because of this, the principle, if you like, of will is something that cannot be made to coexist with human happiness, long-term human happiness. He famously says that human life in practice throughout the ages, and I'm paraphrasing here, so forgive me, oscillates between pain and boredom. When we're not bored, we're in pain. When we're not in pain, when we are at peace, we are bored. Philosopher Kierkegaard said, boredom is the root of all evil. So Schopenhauer has a very pessimistic view on life. And he thinks that he comes to embrace Eastern philosophy, the philosophy of what I call the INFJ Enlightenment, because he sees a prospect for liberation from the self and his blind desires, something that will obviously influence Freud and even Jung to an extent. So he embraces this philosophy, this Eastern philosophy, particularly Buddhism, Hinduism as well, with this idea that he really takes seriously and embraces, that the best way to really be happy is not really to abandon this belief that you could be positively happy, but to consider instead that you could be negatively happy. That by practicing abnegation, self-denial, by abandoning the concept of ego, or trying as much as possible to do that, you will, as far as possible, destruct your own will. The will inside you will be weakened, will be enfeebled, and will be hopefully neutralized, so that you can reach at least inner peace through this extreme self-denial. So I think that what we have here is an alienated INFJ at war with himself in a certain way. It's almost as if he's put the finger on, intuitively put the finger on where the problem is, this obsession with the thing in itself. What is the thing in itself? This thing that we cannot see, that we cannot experience, but must be presupposed in order for us to perceive and interact with anything. He understands the thing in itself is a problem. But he doesn't go all the way as the enlightened INFJs and others of the Eastern religions do, which is to simply come to deny that the thing in itself really exists, and that it's only a conceptual creation that people lock themselves up inside through this embrace of the idea of having a self, an intangible self that is like an essence or soul. And once you liberate yourself from that, once you become kind of one with the universe, you stop thinking that there's a thing in itself. Taoism talks about voidness. It's not as completely innocent here. There's no thing in itself. There's no thing, voidness. So Schopenhauer is able to envision that the thing in itself, the hidden worlds, was the problem, the projection of the alienated INFJ of an ideal world where his alienation would not exist, and he's able to fantasize about it, whether ever being able to resolve the issue intellectually, because it's impossible. But instead of going all the way and saying, well, that's an illusion, doesn't exist, it's only a conceptual creation that ought to be broken down, he paints it negatively as something that ought to be destroyed. So I think that you can probably see the difference and the reason why he's better understood as a transitional figure. He still takes the thing in itself seriously, instead of allowing it to dissolve peacefully as something that, the substance, so-called substance of the universe that is hidden, unseen, and ideal, is simply something that we have to get rid of. Schopenhauer doesn't get rid of it. He sees it as the enemy that ought to be surpassed and vanquished by extreme self-abnegation. Whereas I think, if I understand him to an extent, the Buddhists would say something more like, self-abnegation is the way of coming to grips with the fact that this hidden substance is an illusion. Not for the sake of weakening this force, but for the sake of unveiling it as being what it is, just an illusion. So hopefully I've been able to portray how Schopenhauer as the genius of seeing something very profound and true in the Eastern religion, but remained in a transitional phase, which would be carried forward in his wake by figures that I might discuss in future videos. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed the video. Share a comment if you feel like it. Consider dropping me a like and subscribing. And I'll see you soon, guys. Bye-bye.